Okay, so welcome back. We are going to talk about extended school year services and determining eligibility. And then we'll move on to behavior supports and discipline. I was thinking we could take a break in between the two. And then after the behavior supports and discipline, any questions that you guys might have about other topics, feel free to ask. Okay, so ESY. These services are special education and related services to students with disabilities beyond the normal school year, so over summer. Services are provided in accordance with the student's IEP in the least restrictive environment and at no cost to the parents of the student. The school district must utilize specific eligibility criteria to determine the need for extended school year services to ensure that the student receives a free, appropriate public education. Okay, so what does that eligibility criteria look like? So the time frame for making that determination should be before the summer ESY services are to begin, of course, but generally not before January 1st of that school year. There are 3 criteria or methods used to determine a student's need for ESY services, which include regression, recoupment, critical point of instruction, and special circumstances. First, the regression recoupment criterion. So this is applied to all students with significant cognitive disabilities or those students who function like students with significant cognitive disabilities at all ages and all grade levels, including preschool age students. This criterion should be considered for all students suspected of having difficulty with recoupment of skills. So now what is that? So let's see. Following a break in instruction, so fall break is an example, Thanksgiving or the Christmas holidays, there's a failure to regain the performance level for an objective such that the highest post-break score is lower than the highest pre-break score for any given objective. That means simply that if a student for let's say a math objective on his IEP, if the student after the break, after fall break, there's a test that measures that objective, that math objective, and the score is lower than any score that the student made on the same test prior to the break, then that's what the situation is talking about. So the highest post-break score, so the highest score after the break is less than the highest pre-break score. Does that make sense? Okay. I had to read it a couple of times for me to get it. Okay. So what objectives are we looking at? For students who participate in the LEAP Connect, you can look at those learning objectives on that standardized test. And for students that do not participate in the LEAP Connect, the IEP team shall target specific critical goals or objectives on that student's IEP. So the steps. So the teacher will review the student's performance data before and after a break for a minimum of 2 breaks during the same school year. Okay, so again, if the student discovers that the highest score on testing after the break is lower than the highest score before the break, then that would indicate, may indicate a need for ESY. The student is eligible for ESY services when the performance data demonstrates a pattern of problems with recouping performance on any objective or skill across any 2 breaks within the current IEP. Any questions on that one? Okay. So the second criterion is the critical point of instruction. This is considered for all students. There are 2 fractions of this. The first is without ESY services, the student would be at risk of losing general education class time, or there would be an increase in special education service time because of a lack of academic or social development. So if over the break, over the summer break, you suspect that the student without ESY services during that summer break, that the student would need more special education time, or in the alternative, lose regular education time, then that indicates eligibility under that point of instruction. The second is without ESY services, the student would be at risk of losing significant progress made towards acquisition, fluency, maintenance, or generalization of skills relevant in the pursuit of critical life areas. So self-help, community access, social or behavioral skills. Some examples are behaviors like self-injurious behaviors, aggressive behaviors that would either impact the student's health or interfere with instruction in the classroom. Any questions on this? So how is it applied? The teacher examines student performance data again and determines whether, in the absence of ESY, the student would be at risk of losing general education class time or increasing special education service time to make up for the lack of academic or social skill development. Or that student would be in danger of losing significant progress made toward acquisition, fluency, maintenance, or generalization of skills relevant in the pursuit of a critical life area. Basically a restatement of the previous slide. So the student is eligible for ESY under the second criterion when there is evidence that the impact of providing ESY services could enable the student to maintain or achieve grade level expectations and reduce the loss of skill acquisition, fluency, or maintenance. The third criterion, special circumstances, which is kind of a catch-all. So employment, this applies to students ages 16 to 21. They should be considered for ESY services when there's documentation that the student is in need of support to maintain paid employment. Some examples of paid employment include, pay that is equal to minimum wage, or that student has an alternate wage certificate from the Department of Labor. Another special circumstance includes the transition from early steps. So students who are leaving early steps and entering Part B of the IDEA, preschool services, and who have a spring or summer birthday. Another group of eligible students or to consider are those transitioning to post-school outcomes. So students who have a transition plan in place and who are expected to graduate or to exit the school, but they still have objectives in their transition plan that haven't been met or haven't been completed. ESY could be used to help that student meet those objectives over the summer. So let's see. The student is eligible for ESY when the student is in need of services to complete the action steps that are the responsibility of the school district as outlined in that student's transition plan in his or her IEP, that are not expected to be completed by the end of the student's final year in school. Additional special circumstances include those students that have excessive absences. So for students with a disability who have documented absences during the school year that exceed 25 days for health-related conditions without the provision of homebound services and who has failed to make projected progress shall be considered for ESY. So for those students who have received homebound, that would disqualify. A student is eligible for ESY services when there's evidence that failure to acquire the goals or objectives will seriously jeopardize the overall educational progress of the student, and the ESY services could have a significant impact on the student's ability to make progress towards the acquisition of those goals. Finally, there are unusual circumstances, extenuating circumstances. So in these cases, the teacher shall use professional judgment to make the decision whether the student needs ESY services in order to receive FAPE. The teacher shall determine if a break in instruction will negatively impact or cause the student to lose skills that will restrict the student's ability to function as independently as possible. 2 steps to determine eligibility under this circumstance include: A, consider the previously described ESY eligibility criteria, and B, determine if there is a need for ESY services through the examination of student performance data. Questions? Okay. Well, that went a lot faster than anticipated. Are you guys, I'm assuming everybody is good? We can keep going. Okay. Behavior supports and discipline. Okay, so for students who are exhibiting behaviors that interfere with their ability to receive meaningful or make meaningful progress or educational benefit, a functional behavioral assessment may be needed. So what this does is try to find the why behind the behavior. So what is triggering the behavior? Why, what's causing the student to engage in the behavior? The FBA is used to identify what's occurring when the behavior happens, what the behavior is, and what benefit the student gets from the behavior. So after the behavior assessment, behavior intervention plan is put together and implemented. This behavior intervention plan is for teachers and staff. It provides a roadmap on how to address the behavior, minimize, and track behaviors related to the student's disability. It's not a contract or a punishment, but instead it's meant to help both the teacher and the student. The teacher know what to do in cases of the identified problematic behavior or unwanted behavior, and then to help the student find healthy, productive ways to overcome that behavior or even prevent it from occurring by being able to identify the situations or the triggers or the events that might be leading up to that behavior. Any questions about the FBA or the BIP? Restraint and seclusions. So Louisiana law has specific guidelines on this, limits the use of restraint and seclusion for students with disabilities, including that seclusion and physical restraint can't be used as discipline or punishment, as a threat to control, bully, or obtain behavioral compliance, or for convenience. Under both the IDEA and Section 504, students with disabilities are entitled to significant protections not available to regular education students. And the whole purpose is so that students with disabilities are not punished for the behaviors that are related to their disability. Under the IDEA, a manifestation determination review, or MDR, must be held for all disciplinary changes in placement. Generally, a change in placement occurs when a student is expelled, suspended for more than 10 cumulative days in a school year. So, out of school suspensions that are a couple of days at a time, as those add up, need to be aware. If it goes beyond 10 days, then that's considered a change in placement. Or if there's a pattern of removals. And that doesn't have to be a suspension. That could just be like pull-outs from the classroom. Other forms of informal removals include shortened school days and asking parents to come and get their child early. So these situations could also be considered a disciplinary exclusion that could amount to a change in placement. So what is considered a manifestation? It is a manifestation if the team finds that the conduct in question, the behavior, was caused by or had a direct and a substantial relationship to the child's disability, or the conduct in question was the direct result of the school's failure to implement the IEP. So if the behavior was disability related, or if the behavior was, if the IEP calls for breaks, and the student wasn't offered a break at the designated time, and the student, when he or she should have been offered the break, had a meltdown, and that meltdown resulted in disciplinary action. Well, that you need to be aware that failure to implement the break is also considered a manifestation of the child's disability. So as not to warrant punishment. If it is a manifestation, then a functional behavioral analysis should be developed and or reviewed if it hasn't been. And a behavior intervention plan should be developed and or reviewed. And the student returns to their placement or stays put in their placement. Unless, okay, so the exception, it's never okay. Well, can't say never. It's the exception to this includes weapons, and there's a definition for weapons. Of course, guns are included. Drugs and serious bodily injury. So in these cases, school personnel may remove a student to an interim alternative educational setting, but for not more than 45 school days. Any questions? Nope. No questions online either? Okay.
I noticed that you did say behavior contract. Could you identify a behavior contract early on, as opposed to a BIP?
A behavior contract.
Yeah.
I think
You said it was
it
not.
it was
not-
right.
it's
It was
not.
not a behavior
BIP
contract.
is not a contract, I understand that, but could you explain what a behavior contract is? I mean, I know what it is, but we have them, but as opposed to a BIP.
What is an example of a behavior contract that that you guys have?
I'm not sure that you really need an FBA in order to generate a behavior contract.
And what would be? Do you mind if I ask what the behavior contract, like what an example of that?
You will do this, and you'll check in with a person, you'll
Okay.
you check in at the
Check
end
in,
of the
check out.
day, check in, check out, various and sundry things like that.
Okay, so that does
And
not. That
informal,
wouldn't.
everybody signs it,
Yeah.
the teacher signs it, the student signs it, the parent signs it.
Okay. And what was the question?
The difference between that and a BIP. I know the difference, but I
Well,
thought maybe you'd like to.
sure. So a bit is. So it's my understanding that the BIP is in place to inform all teachers, like across the the school environment. Everyone who interacts with the student needs to be made aware of and take part in the BIP. So to support the student, whenever those behaviors may arise.
Noted in the IEP.
Yes.
Also in the IEP.
Yes. Yes.
Contract is not necessarily in there. Although you put it in there, but.
Okay.
It's less informal, it's less formal.
So I have experience with the in and out.
Right.
And that was included as an addendum to the IEP, and then the BIP cited the in and out as one of the tools to help assist the student. But not all the teachers were involved in the in and out check in, check out for that student. But yes, it's important for all teachers and school district personnel that would interact with the student to be aware of any BIP so that there is, so that there's consistency and support across, all environments. That was a good question. Thank you. Anything else? Any other questions? Okay, there's a request for co-teaching and what that looks like. And really the short and simple of that is all teachers should be informed about a student that has either, or a 504 plan or an IEP. And if accommodations are supposed to be implemented in that classroom, then that teacher does need to have an awareness of the accommodations and how to implement the accommodations. Now, if in the instance in a regular education classroom where the teacher is not able to implement the accommodations because he or she has all these, has the rest of the classroom and students to take care of, and that student's accommodations require support that the teacher isn't able to offer because of all the other obligations that he or she may have. Well, then a para, or additional support needs to be provided so that the accommodations can be implemented. It's not all on the special education teacher to implement accommodations outside of that special education course. It's truly a team effort, and if you as a teacher don't feel like you have the tools or the means or whatever to implement the accommodations, then you need to bring that up with the school district, and there needs to be an IEP team meeting to figure out what needs to happen in order for those accommodations to be implemented. Any other questions, you guys? So I am going to follow up and provide a copy of these PowerPoint slides in addition to, well, my contact information is in the slides. But I'm also going to look into the DocuSign and the question on the IEE and the law behind that obligation. And I can include that as additional slides. If there are any other specific requests for information, I'm open to taking that down and in following up with that. Would anybody be interested in more information about RTI, age of majority, transitions? RTI.
Yes. When you mentioned RTI earlier, you talked about there being the gray area. The gray area is the difficult area because it's very difficult to get that across to a teacher, to a co-teacher, to advocate for the students that you're advocating and doing accommodations for, I just, every year, on both sides of the fence, as a regular ed teacher and now as a special ed teacher, I just wish there were more guidelines to help give the regular ed teacher on differentiation and how that should look like. And I know it's an individual, case-by-case situation, but I feel like advocating for the students, I am as much as trying to help the teacher understand how to make the accommodation equitable. I don't know how to say it exactly. I mean, I know you've heard the arguments before, so.
Well, and that sounds like it could just be for additional information, and that, that is, not everybody knows, has an awareness of how to, of what disabilities look like, and how to accommodate or support them in the classroom. And I think just having awareness of, hey, I have a question, or I'm not so sure about this, and then seeking that help, getting that information, requesting assistance from the school district, putting them on notice that you need some help, or that, hey, this person may have a question about how to implement these services. Then the school district should be there to support you, so that you are able to be an effective educator and provide whatever services the student needs.
Resource that you can get, that we can give general ed teachers, that would basically say, okay, you can go to this particular website to read up on this particular situation so that it can better precipitate strategies to help that student?
Well, Louisiana has its educational bulletins that are specific to different areas, like implementing an IEP, the evaluation process and eligibility, ESY services, that type of information, general information, is found in the Louisiana bulletins, as well as federal law, the IDEA, and 504. Specifics for individual students gets a little bit more difficult. Is that what you were talking about?
A child might have an IEP that says they need this because of this condition. You could go to this particular resource so that it's spelled out, because oftentimes in the classroom the regular ed teacher is focused on every one of their children. They want to meet that need, but they often don't have the opportunity or the time to fully research how they can provide appropriate strategies for that child with that particular situation. So if there was like a cheat sheet or a resource that says, okay, this particular scenario, this particular strategy, and this is where you can find it. Is there something like that out there?
Specific to the student, that the evaluation report should speak to should help guide in instruction and or needs of that particular student, and then the IEP should offer the supports that are needed, and then if there is any additional information specific to the student that's needed, it's up to the IEP team to develop, to implement those strategies or to list those strategies. I see what you're saying, though. I don't know of one good place. There are several places where you can get information about disability-specific behaviors and how what types of supports and interventions might work in specific instances with those disabilities, and I can certainly like include resources, links to resources and information. Sure. Oh, also, there is, I believe, a Louisiana bulletin that speaks to the different disabilities, the qualifying disabilities, and it's been a little while since I've reviewed that information, but I think in addition to the criteria, it may offer some instructional language. I'll go back and look, though. Yes?
Question, you had talked about transitions as it pertains to in-state. What about when a student comes out of state with accommodations and with IEPs from out of state? How does that work?
So I don't have a whole lot of experience with that. The school district, so the incoming school district would need to consider the evaluations that were conducted by the previous school district, out-of-state school district, but different states may have different eligibility criteria for the disabilities that that qualify. So a reevaluation of the student may be necessary, but certainly the school district should consider any IEP that was in place and the accommodations that were that were being implemented.
Specific learning disability here, but if they go to, say, Texas, that may be, and looks at disability mild. It's not the same.
Right, the IDEA does allow states and school districts some discretion in what the criteria looks like. Anything else, you guys? Should we leave it open in case there are questions?
What resources do parents have when accommodations are not met? When school districts feel that it was not necessarily a negative outcome, end of course testing specifically. Should students be eligible by law to retest?
So this sounds like a concern. If accommodations were not being implemented, then that is an issue. Certainly that warrants attention. Hopefully that would be addressed before the end of the school year. In instances where you're reaching the end of the school year and you believe that the student didn't perform well on end of school exams based on a failure to implement accommodations over a period of time during that school year. In that instance, compensatory education may be available. I'm not sure of an entitlement to retesting. But again, that's a situation where I think there's not a general answer, and there's not necessarily an entitlement, but I think that is very case specific question that the law doesn't speak to specifically. But in that instance, if a student is not being promoted to the next grade level for failure to implement accommodations, then that may be a special circumstance where ESY services could be provided and compensatory education to catch up the student or to put the student in the place educationally that student would be in, but for the failure to implement the accommodations, if that makes sense. Would you guys want to leave it open? Or we can conclude a little early, and I will follow up with that information and with the PowerPoint slides in full. No problem. Sure. Okay. That's fine. I can provide the PowerPoint slides and include that additional information, and then follow up with additional information if I get any questions. Yeah, that's it? Okay. Thanks, you guys, for bearing with me. I know the content is not that interesting, but very good to know. Right.